Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and today we're going to be talking about aligning your marketing and games UX. Now, whenever we think about what makes a great game, generally speaking, it boils down to the positive experience players have. However, when making games, the focus shouldn't be making a great game, but making the right game for a particular audience and delivering more value than what's currently available. But even with this shift in mindset, studios and developers can still struggle with how to communicate their game's experience to prospective players. Thankfully, our guest today shares UX design concepts and frameworks that can be translated into marketing efforts that clearly communicate a game's vision and experience to prospective players, making this a cohesive and holistic approach that fully caters to the player's journey and aligns marketing with UX. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And like I said, today with us, we have Neil Edwards of UX is Fine. Neil, how's it going, bud?
It's going really, really well. Great day, and I'm pretty excited to be here as kind of a follow-up from one of the cool, nerdy conversations we had at GDC. So, yeah, excited to be here.
Oh, I know, right? Yeah, and like Neil said, we met at GDC at an event, and we just happened to meet, connect, and have this really amazing nerd out conversation, and which has also prompted why we're here today. But before we even go into some of the specifics and what we're here to ultimately discuss about, I would like to share a little bit of information about Neil. As I said, he is with UX is Fine. He's the founder and head of that company. You're the founder of UX is Fine, but the head of UX. And you have a great team that you guys with you, Jason Sklar. Am I pronouncing his name right?
Yeah. I mean, Sklar, close enough.
Close enough.
I think it's a toss-up. Yeah. Jason's one of my co-founders along with Dave Inscore.
Yeah, which is interesting because before we even met, I knew Jason quite a bit, connected with him on LinkedIn and stuff. But anyways, like you said, Jason and Dave are also co-founders with you. And I was just curious. I mean, we'll get into this, I guess, a little bit more in terms of what you guys do. But how many people right now is made up of the company?
We're about 15 or so. So we leverage a decent number of contractors. We've got some full-time W-2 folks, so that number kind of flexes a little bit.
Yeah.
12, sometimes 20, depending on if we're running a lot of projects at once.
Right, and that could very well happen because I mean, part of your drive and focus is really the fact that you guys absolutely love making great games with amazing people. And in particular, what you guys do is, you work with devs, studios, and teams to really enhance their games UX to make sure that the player's experience is more engaging and compelling. And I know there's a lot of other things you do too, but it's all kind of with that UX focus in mind. And, I know a lot of digging in further, and if you want to provide a little bit more insight to this, is just really helping companies drive their metrics, achieve their business, and create goals in terms of improving their bottom line and such, correct?
Yeah. So we take a pretty holistic approach to UX. I'll be super brief here because I know we got lots of juicy stuff to get into. Yep. But I run the UX department, and unlike some companies, we have a separate UX department and UI department. We work insanely close and collaboratively together, but we're big believers that there are different skill sets. And we really empower kind of experts in both fields to kind of collaborate together. So we do a lot of style guide work, brand identity definition on the UI side, as well as obviously executing on UX designs. But a lot of our stuff is ultimately focused on that bottom line, right? How can we drive more engagement with your game? How can we help you create systems and deliver an experience that's really compelling to your users, ultimately to drive your game, not just as a gameplay experience, but as a product, right? And lead to more product success and those business goals and things like that. So
that's really cool. And you know, if I really to distill this for you, basically you guys are problem solvers from a UX standpoint.
Yeah.
Awesome. And last but not least, just to call out too, I mean, some of the teams and you know, entities that you've worked with, you know, Epic Games, Riot Games, Activision, 2K, Bethesda, and I'm sure many others too. I think that just, you know, probably speaks volume to the type of work and focus and dedication that you have with the work you do. So it just wanted to call out to that to give people a better understanding of like how passionate you guys really are about the one thing that you guys do well, which is making UX and just that whole player experience a lot more engaging.
Yeah, we're super blessed. We've got an incredible team of insanely talented, passionate, hardworking people that have, you know, made quite a name for us in the industry. And so we've been fortunate enough to work with amazing partners, and you know, people love what we do for them, and so they keep coming back. And that wouldn't be possible without the amazing team that we have out there doing a ton of great work.
Awesome, and yeah, it definitely makes an impact in how that and how all you are able to work with each other and make good things from that collaboration. All right, let's get forward with things in turn. But before we get into the discussion, which we're so close to, I got to throw you in the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box round is just a series of quick random questions I prepared for Neil here today. Neil, are you ready for the Q Box round?
I am.
Excellent. So, first one is, what's your biggest gaming pet peeve?
I'll offer a twofer here, which will probably be a theme for me. But unskippable dialogue and cutscenes. I won't dive on it, but oh god, it just gets me. It just gets me. And like long tutorials that aren't like the game at all. Like it's just a totally different environment. It's not the experience I showed up for, and I have to, you know, play your game for 20 minutes or 5 minutes or an hour and a half to get to the actual like gameplay experience. Those are things that as a player I really struggle with, and at work we try to help people with.
I mean, I feel like we could talk about that one subject alone for like, well, anyways, besides the point. Next, what's the most common mistake you see devs or studios make with their games?
I'll probably give another multi-part answer that are kind of connected. So I think if game dev has one curse above all, it's visions that aren't clear enough. They're not codified enough. They're not prioritized. They're great pitch decks, but they don't necessarily make for great blueprints that are actionable tools to kind of help you get out of the weeds when inevitably you kind of thing isn't working or it's not fun, or you kind of, what is it that exactly we're making? And kind of goes hand in hand with that is a lack of really clear goals, like more at the feature level, like prioritized goals. You know, I've seen a lot of goals throughout my career that are more or less like lists of like functional requirements, like the user can do this, but it doesn't dive into like really why we're making the thing, why it's going to compel people, and kind of get down to some of those self-evident first principles about like why this is an engaging feature for players for us to invest in. So those I think are probably the big ones I see.
Nice. And last but not least here, which is the staple in the show, what game are you playing now?
I'm playing a disturbing amount of Marvel Snap right now. It's terrible. I kind of go on and off with it, but there's just it's for the last few months, it's kind of taken over my life. Before that, I did a really cool stint on Strange Horticulture, which was an amazing game. Mm-hmm. And I will always take an opportunity to tell people how amazing Tunic is. And it is one of the best design games I've ever played in my life. That was a little while back, but those are some recent ones for me.
Sweet. Well, definitely appreciate you sharing that and being so honest and transparent with, your current, we wouldn't call it obsession, but
it's fair to call it an obsession. Let's call it what it is.
Marvel Snap. So no, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And now, as I mentioned, we're here to dive in and talk quite a bit about this topic, which is really like it's it's just amazing because it's something that I believe strongly about. You do too, obviously, as it encompasses your work, well, and mine too. And it was just for quick context, folks, when we met at GDC, we were just like, hey, hi, how are you? The typical, like, what do you do type stuff. And then next thing you know, we went on this like huge, I don't know, nerd out conversation. I don't know how you want to describe it, Neil, but basically we had this conversation and then we're like, we need to discuss this in further detail with and sharing what we're talking about with others. And that topic is for today, aligning your marketing and games UX.
Yeah, I think the scientific term of what we went on was a rabbit hole. A rabbit hole full, a rabbit hole full of tangents.
But like all like valuable stuff. I mean, there's rabbit holes.
Oh, it's fascinating. I love it. I love it. I think it's underutilized, the connection between the two of these, which is like some of what your questions I think are getting at is these things aren't typically really necessarily thought of together or focused on or aligned in such a good way. And I think we're going to dive into that a bunch today. And I mean, I could talk about this shit forever.
Well, why don't we do this? Let's kick off with something because, when I was going over your, basically your bio, providing some insight for people in terms of what you do and everything, and some of it pulled from you directly, some of it I pulled from, your website and stuff. And one thing that I caught that was prominent in like your messaging and everything is, making a great game. So I kind of want to push on you on that a little bit because to kick things off here, making a great game is something that all developers and studios strive for. However, defining what makes a great game can be really subjective. So how are you able to define and objectively determine what makes a great game?
Yeah, so I think I'll add some quick caveats to contextualize this. So I think it's great is a very valuable word and it's important. I think it's a slight misnomer in the sense that it's really, I think about it more as right, not great, right? Right for your audience, picking a viable audience that has a market, delivering them something that is going to compel them to dedicate, their time and money to your product versus someone else's. And a lot of that times means delivering them something that is, has enough novelty to it that they haven't had before, and it's some type of an experience that not only is engaging when you get in it on the UX side, but is something you can sell to them, right? Something that has hooks to it on the marketing side. And the other difference, and this is probably a talk for another time, but the other semantical put on my monocle, stand on my soapbox thing is like there's a difference between a great game and a great product. And there is a lot of overlap there. It's hard to have a great product without a great game, but you can have a great game without a great product. But that's probably a whole nother can of worms for another time. But specifically to get to your question, one of the things specifically we use to do this, and it's not like objectively guaranteed success, otherwise I'd be a millionaire.
Right.
And I wouldn't be talking about it. I would hoard my little secret. But a thing that really helps us is we've developed this framework, the experience measurement framework, we call it. We shorthand it to EMF. You'll probably hear me talk about EMF a bunch on this chat. But it's similar to like Quantic Foundry's gamer motivation model, Game Refinery stuff. Their stuff tends to be a little bit more focused on market research. What we've done is really come up with this this model that codifies and prioritizes the vision for a game and goals through an experiential lens. So it's a set of experiences that boil down to a core set of human motivations. I won't dive on it, but they come from self-determination theory, core psychological needs, things like that. And so what it does is it gives us a shared language to go from something that's kind of a pitch deck, which is where most vision decks start and kind of where a lot of them end. And it allows us to really get specific. It allows us to dive into our core loop, even in the early stages where we're just conceptualizing it and say, hey, what are our P1 motivations? What are our P2 motivations? What experiences are going to deliver those? And since we're working with a known set, it gives us this really powerful tool that we've had a ton of success with devs on to get more specific, to give their teams, their leadership more of a blueprint to kind of scrutinize early designs, help them get out of the weeds. Inevitably, almost every game goes through an identity crisis, I call it, at some point. And the cool thing is, and I'll kind of stop here in a second because I'll ramble. But the really cool thing is, it's not just like, a lot of vision stuff is like a really overpriced poster, right? And we all put it on our wall and it sounds cool, but we really focus on this being not just an artifact, but a tool. And it funnels through, we use the same framework to do motivational user segments that kind of go beyond personas and traditional demographics, which are great for what they are, but they just kind of scratch the surface, knowing how old you are, and other kind of things about you doesn't really tell me exactly what your motivations are for games. And so we use this all the way down to vision, user segments, feature goals, and it becomes a framework that gets all the way down to the decision levels of what gets more screen real estate. And so that is, that's a bit of our kind of special sauce that we use on the UX side with people to help them codify really what they're chasing, help validate it, help iterate on it a little bit more clearly, give them a little bit more of a clearer picture of a North Star, if you will.
Yeah. No, and I like that you drilled that down further because, I mean, though we started off that conversation at a high level as like, hey, great game is subjective. And then like the progression of how you boiled that down was great because, again, like going back to some of your points, you're saying like, it's not necessarily about great, which it's about being right. And right in terms of for your audience. And I love that too, because so many times out there I have seen, people talk about, at least from a marketing perspective, is like, it starts with a great game. And I've always questioned that because I'm like, well, because you see it on wherever, Reddit, other places that people call out to like, hey, everybody's going to think, like a lot of games out there they're babies, right? Especially for younger teams that maybe it's their first or second or whatever games. And well, of course they're going to think your baby's great. But it's not necessarily the case. And I love that perspective and looking at it and then making sure that it's right for the audience opposed to a great game and what defines great, looking at it with a different lens. And then, like you said, boiling that down into your process. So it really showcases in terms of not just right in terms of your audience, but scratch it, going beyond than what we might initially know about market research and everything of that, and really catering to that player, their behaviors, their characteristics, and all those things, and ultimately making what we envision or feel is that great game. There's so much more context there.
Yeah, and I think, and just to add one last little bit, I do think it is critical to have a great game, but saying we need a great game it's vague and it's really tough to execute on, right? So yes, you need a great game, but we see a lot of money and risk exposed in game dev, and if you don't have this giant war chest, sometimes finding that great game is an unbelievably expensive, risky, costly journey. And a lot of what we try to do is give you, like I said, not to repeat myself too much, but give you more tools to kind of navigate that tough jungle of, great game is like the most vague definition. What specifically is the great game that we are trying to make, right? Because there's a million different great games, and giving us more of that map on how to get there, right? And it's never going to make games 1, 2, 3 easy to make a successful game. But it will give you it does give folks a lot more aids and powerful things to kind of make those decisions. And when you're scratching your head being like, man, people we built kind of what we thought we wanted, but people aren't really engaging with it. It gives you more of that tool to really dissect and have a shared language to understand why and then move forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, keeping that in mind and some of the other things, there's some things you mentioned before too, where, or alluded to in terms of like, marketing and UX and how they relate and stuff, and ultimately how and why we're here in the core discussion is kind of aligning those things. And I kind of want to discuss some of the differences and similarities between those two things, like, marketing and UX. So what I'm curious about is, can you give us kind of like a high level look at what the core differences are between UX and marketing? Because I think defining this is important because I think a lot of people kind of see things in this way at face value most of the time. So what are those core differences?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I'll take a whack at marketing. I don't know that my definition will be very good, and you can probably correct me, and I'll step on some landmines. But obviously, I got my head pretty well wrapped around user experience. Hopefully, running a UX company. But so the thing that I think is a little bit different. A lot of people say UX in the game industry and other industries. We could talk forever about where this comes from, this kind of bias or whatever you want to call it. They say UX. What they really mean is UI. They're like, design an inventory screen. We need a crafting menu. And UI is an important piece of UX, but it's a piece, right? UX is, I always joke with people that shorthanding user experience to UX is like the best and worst thing we ever did. You make it this little 2-letter thing and it kind of creates a misunderstanding. Ultimately, UX and UX design is the user experience. So it's the whole shebang. It's the whole user's experience. And not everyone thinks about it that way, and that's fine. Everyone does it differently. But the way we do it, the way we think about it, our DNA, our ethos is we think about it extremely holistically. So while we are not system designers, game designers, feature designers, audio folks, we are not those folks, and we are not necessarily responsible for systems. We are certainly responsible for helping give feedback on those systems. That's a lot of what we do. Giving feedback on systems, on features, helping those experts that are responsible for bringing those things kind of to life, helping them kind of ensure that we all deeply understand what is that experience? Why are people showing up to this feature, showing up to this game? And then helping them not just through UI design, but like I said, feedback, pushback, healthy pushback between game design and UX is critical to success in my mind. And then helping those folks, deliver that, really understanding, like I said, the why and the how. A lot of times we design a thing and, implicitly we just have this kind of vague implicit understanding, it comes from another game, or we're like, yeah, it'll be cool. But we help folks get more specific about why it's going to engage people. And then we help them diagnose when it's not. So that's, so we give feedback on sound, visuals, animation, because it all wraps up into the user's emotional experience. The thing I say to people is, this is a bit buzz phrasy, but I really do believe it, is like people play, people stay, and people pay when their psychological and emotional needs are being and motivations are being satisfied. And that's a lot of what we do. So marketing, to flip my marketing hat on, marketing is about communicating that experience, right? It's about communicating that vision and having a hopefully super compelling, but not only super compelling, but accurate message of what are the experiences you're going to get in the game. And I think it's key in marketing personally, and we'll probably get into this more, to go beyond just the feature set, right? Not rattling off bullet points of all the features that from other games that you're similar to. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's value there in setting some anchors of familiarity, but speaking to people's the promise, right? That emotional satisfaction. Is it challenge? Is it mastery? Is it exploration? Is it discovery? Is it self-expression? What are those things? And so, having that deep understanding of the experience, you're providing is critical to be able to do successful marketing, right? And marketing is it's the poster, right? It's the thing that gets me in and goes, holy shit, man, that sounds like an awesome experience, or that's right. Unique, right? We talk about awareness, we talk about discoverability issues, all that's linked to your UX, how that meshes with your marketing, and things like that. So yeah, that's my quick little rant on how I see the two.
Yeah, no, and what I found really funny is, well, first, I totally, clearly differentiated between, what are these differences? Like, very clear, right? But then at the same time, when you start talking about UX, I was listening to you and I'm like, wow, how he's describing UX, you could easily probably just insert marketing in place of UX here and it would still make sense. Like,
oh yeah, and
which is so funny, like that it's so interchangeable, even though we look at it so differently too.
Because the other thing is your marketing, and we'll get to this more, I'm sure, your marketing has a UX. Anything you make and someone comes across, they have an experience with it. So you can apply UX design principles to your marketing. Mm-hmm. But we'll probably get to that. But yeah,
absolutely. So it's like, again, I loved how you further defined how they differentiate, but still, it's like, it's almost that like they're identical, but not, it's just so weird for those things to happen. But anyways, I now I want to kind of go into a little bit more, dive in a little bit more on this in terms of like, marketing and UX, let's say kind of what we talked about a little bit in differentiating are generally siloed into separate departments, right? Yeah. So why do you think it's important then to view these separate areas of a project with a more cohesive lens?
Yeah. So it may seem obvious, but I'll kind of use like a bit of maybe a simplified metaphor here. Like the UX is the thing you're selling. It's the thing people are gonna show up for and why they're gonna stay, why they're gonna give you time and money. And the marketing is how you sell that thing. So it's pretty hard to sell a thing that you don't deeply understand. So like the analogy I sometimes use is like a restaurant, right? So in a restaurant, the UX folks responsible for the UX, the designers, developers in our game dev world, they're the chefs, they're the servers, they're the service staff. They're responsible for the menu, the ingredients, the food, the items, the quality of the service, the nature, the ambience, the atmosphere. They're responsible for the dining experience, and they are experts in knowing why do people show up to our restaurant. Is it a family-friendly greasy spoon? That's late night. Is it a rowdy kind of bougie bar with small like what atmosphere is, what are people coming from? They're experts in that experience. And then you have the marketing folks, right? And so they're the marketing people, right? They're the people that are doing the photos, the website, the social media, right? Choosing the words and the imagery and the signage and all that stuff about how we bring that in. And so you can easily imagine a scenario that like if there's not an intimate understanding and communication between those two people, you're going to have this big mismatch, right? Where you have marketing content that maybe just misses the magic nugget of really people. Why do people show up to this restaurant? Because it's not just the food, right? It may be the service, it may be the energy, it may be the way people interact with you, it may be some other thing. So you could have marketing that's completely ineffective because maybe it misses the mark, or maybe they're over-indexing on something that they think is important, but actually isn't important. And so we're kind of promising people A, and then you have customers walking in thinking it's A and they get G, right? Or they're looking for something else, or we may be misaligning expectations. We may be missing opportunities to really kind of show our promise. And so, it kind of goes without saying, like the whole product, when you think about seeing a website for a restaurant, you hear your friend tells you about a game, you go look it up on Steam, then you play the game, and that whole thing is one giant journey. And we have to be really careful of, bumps on that journey of, oh, I thought this was this. Or sometimes it's like a positive surprise of like, oh man, I was kind of on the fence, like, this looks okay. And then I was like, holy shit, this game is way cooler than I thought it was, because our marketing wasn't really capturing what the special sauce and magic of the game was, because we weren't in line as teams.
Yeah. And you know what, that last one you just said really, I think, is a great way of encapsulating in terms of what a missed opportunity could look like. It's like, oh, I heard about this game, whatever. All right, maybe I'll throw it in my library, the demo, whatever. And then you play and you're like, whoa, this is really cool, right? And then it's like, so that potential scenario is like, let's say, definitely a missed opportunity. What else could have been done to really emphasize what that experience was like from a marketing perspective? Or there could be the other one. Let's go back just so simply, the restaurant example, like, let's say, okay, the chefs are working on stuff and, the season's changing, they're putting out a new menu, but marketing didn't get the memo in terms of when that was happening. So you have customers that are seeing this menu online or something, and then they go in and they're like, oh, we don't have any of that now. Like, yeah. Right. And I mean, these are all like exact situations I'm sure we can all relate to, but just then take that and apply it to a game. What happens if you're promising one thing and then you're delivered another? And that's just an unfortunate event in terms of misalignment there and things like that. But just
absolutely,
just so many things to expound upon and understand in terms of, how these things and why it's essential for teams to really be on the same page and have that level of communication in terms of, hey, we're updating our menu, or hey, maybe within it showcase this cool unique factor that draws in a lot of this player type and show that as well as we needed to in our images or our messaging or whatever that form of communication is to that potential audience.
Yeah, and it's in restaurants it's not just a picture of the food, it's the lighting, it's the emotional state that the lighting creates. And games has the same analogy, right? If you look at all your screenshots, like what is each one trying to communicate? Like, is each one effective? Like all that stuff. And you can't answer those questions without a pretty deep collaboration between the folks that are responsible for kind of owning that vision and that understanding for what the experience is that people are showing up for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know what, I want to push you a little bit more further in terms of, and again, this might not be necessarily something relating to what you do day in day, but I just want your initial thoughts or opinions in terms of what do you think are some good ways to do that? So, because sometimes, as we outlined, some of this UX stuff as it applies to games can be very technically based and everything. But so what's a good way of maybe distilling some of that information or looking at it from a higher level that can then easily relate or translate well to the marketing team and even potentially vice versa? Like what are some things that that you can think of that could help relay that information so everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, so not to sound like a billboard for ourselves, but and I'll get into some specifics. Like that's really what the EMF is aimed at, and so I think it's really important. I think it's really important to have an incredibly strong vision set of artifacts. One of the things that we do, we outline these different player segments. We outline what their priorities are, right? So we can speak to them, and then we kind of hold them up against our priorities. So prioritizing using some type of framework, whether you just go grab, Game Refineries or Quantic Foundries, like using something to get a shared language and a shared set of definitions. And then really, I think priority is so important, right? I think I will bang this drum till I'm blue in the face, and I'm sure lots of people that work with me, are tired of hearing it. But I think that's an easy downfall of like, our game is this and this and this. It's just like, well, what is the number one thing? And it doesn't mean only talk about that thing. But if your game is really number one on mastery, right, or thoughtful challenge, as a vehicle for mastery, understanding what your P1s are and writing them down and sharing that in some type of document with folks. So then you can kind of think about prioritizing your marketing content so that your P2s and P3s sit accordingly in your marketing, or you understand the users that they're aimed at and you make specific content that maybe amplifies a P2 or amplifies a P3 that's aimed at a specific user base. I totally lost my train of thought there for a second. We do a lot with, I'll have folks, like especially folks when we're kind of onboarding them to the EMF, like new team members and things like that. We'll have them do kind of mock visions for live games. And one of the first things I have them do is like, obviously we can't talk to the devs. They're not a client. This is just kind of a practice exercise. Look at their Steam page, look at all their marketing material and pull words out of it and pull verbs out of it, pull nouns out of it, pull adjectives out of it, and map those two experiences in this model or whatever model you may be using. And so we'll do stuff like that to kind of decode and translate into our language what experiences we're promising. So another way to think about that is like, look at your feature set, and get out of the technical of all the features. And just, you don't even necessarily have to have a model. I think it's better if you do, but working with your team to kind of make a map of the core loop of your game, make a list of your features and just jot down what you think the kind of experiences are for each one. And then, work on some language that you think speaks to that, right? What are the verbs and nouns and adjectives and kind of action statements and calls to action that we're going to use among our team? They're going to map to that thing, right? So having a living kind of shared document that marketing can contribute to and that game design and UX also has a role in, where you kind of create a mapping, right? A mapping between marketing language and emotion and what we're going to do to be evocative, and that kind of more technical maybe jargony, maybe feels like jargony feature set lists to marketing people, like creating a mapping between those two things. Also, I'm huge on comp analysis, right? And kind of defining those kind of anchor points, using them as reference and codifying those things of like, hey, we think this is super effective over here, or we're really pulling, this kind of thing from over here. So let's see how they do it. So to me, it's about documentation, supporting good communication, being able to iterate between those teams.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you called out too in terms of like taking things down from the more technical aspect of things, like basically the priorities that you listed, like what's that P1, right? What's that main one? And then basically equating that into like, okay, that's probably a good thing then to kind of like focus on what that core messaging is, or basically, your hook, the feedback. What is the game's hook? And that's like a term that, boom, easily can convert well to marketing folks. And then from there, like you said, it's like, okay, well, what are the other priorities? What are the other focuses here that really helps emphasize that experience, make it even better and such. And then it's like, okay. And then when it's talking about, and this all goes back to what you said before about the great game thing, but it's not so much that, it's about the great product that you can make or making it right. Like what is right for their audience. And now it's going through that kind of like, it could be a trial and error, but look at the right audience for, okay, we got our hook or P1 and let's emphasize or layer that with our P2 or P4 or whatever the case may be to see, okay, how else are we getting in front of the right audience? You have the core audience, but then you also have various audiences like affinity audiences or things along that line in terms of equating these things or translating it to marketing people and your marketing department or whoever, and vice versa. And to add on to that, though, like the mapping aspect's great, documentation. I mean, these are just all important things that personally I feel, and just also from my experience, that just not enough or a lot of people do. And sometimes why it can kind of miss the boat. And then just to last to simply comment, hey, we have this mapping in place, but we also have this messaging, and how can we even emphasize that experience more with proper word use or certain verbs or adjectives that really emphasize the point in that experience, and just coming together and making everything from the first impression down to the actual game experience align.
Yeah, and one last super note, and I know we got lots of good stuff to cover, so I'll just be brief. You mentioned something that I think is really important. I think every vision deck ever, kind of in concert with some of the stuff that I'm talking about that we really believe in, is like, write down your USPs, write down your hook, write down your differentiators, because part of what that does is it's the brutal honesty bit that's like, do we have really differentiators? Like, do we have USPs? Like, is our game unique enough? And part of that plugs directly into marketing, right? Because some of those differentiators are, man, everyone loves ARPGs, but they really everyone kind of bitches about this part of ARPGs, right? Or, like, are you pulling something that people love from another genre? Are you making an innovation that maybe is why people get rubbed the wrong way in another genre? And that can plug directly into your marketing language. It can plug directly into consumer problems or pains or that you're trying to solve, like that. Again, it's more mapping. It's connecting the dots. How does our game, because ultimately your players are coming from other games. So capturing what games they are coming from and why you believe they're going to come to your game is really critical. And it's sometimes it's eye-watering a little bit, because you're like, man, really? We think we're going to pull people from Call of Duty into our indie shooter? And it forces you sometimes to be really honest with yourself about your game. And I think that's really important.
No, I so love that you brought this up, and I'm going to digress for a quick moment, but it's totally relative to what you just said, where I have a client right now that I'm working with, and we are actually having that same exact conversation, meaning like we identify and realize from play testers and things that and how we're kind of our initial pitch. And again, some of these things is actually a process of discovery or finding out what is the best way to align with this audience. And one of the things that we have been learning is a couple things. One, play testers are looking for certain characteristics or mechanics or other things, even just simple functionality like a dodge button. But the point and design and purpose of the game is, well, we don't want to necessarily design it to be something that like a small group of players want it to be, because that's not the experience that we're trying to promote. And then on top of that, also keeping that in mind, but also focusing on the aspect of even something as simple as classifying it as a particular genre. We're at face value at first, we were like, this is clearly an ARPG, right? But then because of a lot of other elements about the game, and then talking to and collaborating with other people, it's becoming more apparent that, okay, well, it might play a little bit like an ARPG because of a lot of other factors and nuances. The general impressioning from at least a marketing standpoint, it's probably a lot better to position it as a JRPG or RPG opposed to an ARPG. And just doing the extra work and understanding those things can make all the difference in terms of how it communicates, everything from the marketing, but also down to the gameplay, because part of that too, and I think what you were alluding to, is simply that just because you're pitching it as one thing, as long as it's within line and context of those general expectations that these audiences or groups have, then make it at least accessible to then explore and a new experience that might be a little bit different than what they're used to. And again, it's like you got to be careful, because that concept can also backfire depending on other things too, so it's intricate, but it's interesting.
That's why making games is hard, right?
Yeah, right.
It's that quote, right? It has to be familiar enough that people recognize it, but unique enough that, people, it's going to compel them to be, hey, I'm going to play this different thing. I'm going to, because we're all competing for people's time and money.
Exactly.
And it's limited. And so your thing's got to be different enough or better enough, which is probably not grammatically correct, but to convince people to buy into it, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so with that in mind, I think a lot of some of our anecdotes and things and experiences that we shared are definitely relating to aligning, marketing and UX, right? This is what we're here to talk about, the real core of this topic. So I want to talk about that, but I kind of want to look at things from a different perspective too, and kind of really bring everything that we've discussed to this point together, right? So when you think about the business of making games, the process is generally focused on development first, then marketing, right? I think everybody here can agree to that. Maybe there's one like outlier instance, but for the most part, we can all be for that. And specifically what I'm referring to this, to simplify, is, for example, the path for developers and studios is, game, then marketing. Simple, clear cut, right? But then for players, the path is marketing, then the game, right? So it's completely flipped. So my question here is, do you think having a simple and clear idea of the player journey in this context, and let's say even more holistically, is important for developers and studios to properly align and create a complete game experience?
Absolutely is the simple answer, and then we'll dive into that. But absolutely, if you're not thinking about this, it might work. It's just big risk. And I'm glad that you used the term specifically player journey, because I'm a huge believer, like all too often, kind of like you're describing, we start at the game and we just kind of assume like we're all stoked, we're all hyped, we're like, yeah, creative juices, we're like, this is awesome. And we just start there kind of, and we kind of offload the idea of, getting someone to our game and convincing people our game is awesome to someone else. And we're just kind of like, yeah, people are going to want to be here. This is awesome. We think it's awesome. But it's incredibly important to very specifically, I believe, to create a user journey, multiple user journeys actually, based on different entry points. So I heard about this game from my friend. I saw this game on Steam, whatever, enumeration, and create user journeys of that path to play, right? And also that path, not only the path to play, but then that path through early play, that path through chart the whole damn thing out and start to understand And this will get into maybe some of our other questions of like, later in the game, do we have hooks? Do we have, possibility for organic growth? Do we have emotional kind of like, highs and lows that create shareable moments? But kind of back to the beginning is we don't, myself included, I'm guilty of this sometimes for sure. As UXers, sometimes we don't apply enough of our UX design skill to outside of the game. So to get really specific on, for some tips, if you will, like map out that user journey into your game, but don't just map it out and go, okay, yeah, this is how people are going to get here. Use it to walk through. So when you've got your first Steam, like try to, curse of knowledge, you should get outside people, you should get users, you should get other folks. But even in your first low and humble bit, try to put your user hat on, try to do your best to erase your curse of knowledge and say, okay, boom, I heard about this game from someone. It came up on, hey, similar to these games in my Steam. And then I click on my Steam page and we've got our first design of our Steam page. What are your first thoughts? What are the first thing you do? So use this user journey and user test your Steam page, user test and again, you're not necessarily the user, but your first quick test to kind of sanity check some things.
Right.
Click through that thing and try to be like, this is where brutal honesty is really important, right? And I didn't get a chance to see the GDC talk, but the title was amazing. And it's just like something like, nobody cares about your game. And it's so true in that like attention spans are shorter than ever. So when you look through your screenshots, when you look through your video, would you even watch the video? I mean, do you even watch the video on your Steam page? Like, will people do that? So really applying a user experience design, user research methodologies, user journeys to help vet that material with others, with folks on your team, and really be honest with yourself and get outside eyes. Like, is it effective? Because I'm not going to sit here and say like I'm good at marketing or not. I know how to do it well. But as a consumer, I definitely know when I bounce off a Steam page in like 5 to 7 seconds. And I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in the details, but like there's nothing to worry about like 30 seconds into your video or a minute into your video if people don't care after the first 5 seconds of your video, or they're out after the first paragraph. They're not going to do the read more or about this game section, right? So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's really important to apply those UX design principles to that marketing journey, like you're saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a lot of interesting points, because remember how in the beginning you're like a core focus or just even not necessarily a core focus, just a concept and principle you follow as a whole is like treating everything holistically, right? How does this engage with this? How are we being mindful of the audience, of the player, all these other things, holistic, right? But I see this and you definitely painted, I think, a clear picture in terms of what happens a majority of the times. And another thing you called out to earlier too is like, hey, we help people get out of the weeds. Well, it's like we're always going to be in the weeds in the work that we do, no matter what we do. And it takes a lot of practice and probably time and everything else to get to a point where we can remove ourselves, get that high level look. And what you just outlined, and let's say equate it to marketing, it's like, oh, okay, we made this trailer. That's a very in the weeds type approach. Not approach, just very in the weeds situation, scenario, making the trailer, regardless in what capacity it's made. You hire someone or you're making it, whatever, made the trailer. Then, we made the screenshots. Then we made this. Everything is so simply focused to the very bottom level, basically in the weeds. And then we're like, we know, okay, we have this checklist, right? We got to put up the trailer, announce it. We got to now, put our screenshots on Steam. We got to make sure that the text, all the text fields, and we look at everything as very objectively super focused in this list, essentially, that we're all trying to make sure we're doing everything right. But then we don't always take that level of understanding what does that user journey look like. Great, you have all the assets you need, whether they're in game or in your marketing, but we don't necessarily take that holistic approach, like you said, and like you said, like applying the UX concepts and everything to your marketing. But we don't always like say, okay, what's the first impression like when I look at this image, and then what does it look like when I get to the Steam page, and again, it goes back to what you're saying about the restaurants and what if these things don't align? And again, taking that holistic approach, but also that whole user journey is a really good way, because then you might find out, oh, wow, the trailer says one thing, the Steam page says another. And then when people question about why their marketing or why their game didn't do well, if they weren't taking that approach in terms of understanding the user journey, that could be a very legitimate reason why something might not work, but also hard to, fully understand that at the same time. Because some people, like I said, if you're just very task oriented, you're checking off all the boxes. You're like, I'm doing things right, but there's still no aligning with that whole overall experience.
Yeah, the tasks, the check boxes are the pieces of the puzzle in this metaphor, and the whole thing, you got to put the puzzle together and see how it looks in the end, right?
Yeah, right.
Each puzzle may seem great, but you got to put the puzzle together and take a look at it, right? And it can be hard, it could be right. Definitely humbling, but it's a really cool, empowering tool because it's pretty sobering pretty quickly, and it's just, you can learn so much even just by kind of trying to put on your own user goggles, like in a humble way. If you don't have a lot of resources, you can learn a lot pretty quick and be like, oh yeah, man, this I would just click next, right? But then you with that deeper experience of UX, start to understand, okay, how do we get people like that, right? Because people aren't going to spend 20 seconds exploring here. How do we get them like that, right? And so it's just a really powerful tool that I think, and a way of thinking about things that can help people a lot with their marketing efforts and overall the success of their game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and light with all this too, I want to dig in one more area too, in terms of like when it comes down to creating, a compelling and engaging experience, for players, because we know that this is absolutely an essential requirement for I'll say this with quotations, making a great game. But then, taking what you know and how you guide, for example, your teams with key principles and best practices, how do you think that these techniques can be applied to awareness efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with awareness is, right, discoverability is harder than ever. And so some of the stuff you can do is like, the way that you design your game is going to shape your awareness efforts a ton, right? And this may seem obvious, like, so I'll try to skip through it, but like, we see people do it all the time, and it's understandable. Like, designing, something that's in a red ocean, and if you can codify your UX earlier and have better, clearer comps and see, hey, man, I don't know if like this roguelike deck builder or roguelike Metroidvania is the thing, that's going to make our lives the easiest when it comes to awareness. So some of it is just understanding the thing you're designing, how it sits in the market, and looking at that early is going to give you hopefully a pretty good look at, okay, maybe we need to shift genres, or maybe we need to do something that's a little bit more unique, or unless we have a big marketing budget, we feel like we can just go out and compete, right? And that's the thing, you and I joked about this, I think, either at GDC or in our exchanges, like there is no answers, right? It's kind of, game dev is all rules of thumb, and it's different for you and what your resources are and your setup, but definitely think about the design of your game from a market perspective, early on. And again, it's just, I think, and I'll breeze through some of this because I think we kind of covered on it, but like you can't effectively communicate the promise of what you're selling if you don't understand it first, right? So if you're not dedicating time to codifying that, because the thing is like, yes, people look for features and things like that, but emotions speak to people. And if you can speak to that emotion and that satisfaction, I kind of think of it as like learning the emotional language of your game. You can speak that directly to people. And again, I'm not a marketing person, but I'm a human person. And I think that stuff's pretty powerful. The other couple like last little bits I think about is, how do we apply some of those best practices and things like that, specifically to marketing. I was just on another podcast recently talking about Marvel Snap. And this same kind of thing came up, is when we think about like organic growth, right? A lot of, the best way you can get someone to buy your game is to have a friend tell them about it, because that is such a powerful, like, confidence scale tipper for me as a purchaser. Like if someone tells me, dude, this game is awesome, And part of the reason they do that is not just a great game, air quotes, it's specifical, that's not a word. It's specific, what I think of as shareable or share-worthy moments in your game, right? So for people to share, for me to take the effort to text you, to bring it up in a conversation, to remember it, I need a dose of like emotional potency, right? I need that high or that low, that, it's the snap, it's when someone snapped on you and then you snap back and you beat them in the last turn. It's the clutch in Valorant. It's some big reveal or twist in your story. It's those those moments in the game where you hit this emotional high or an emotional low and all that. Those moments I think are really important to think about specifically in your game and ask yourself, do we have those moments? Do we have those moments that people are going to get on Twitter and be like, holy shit, this screenshot, this thing just happened to me. So to me, that's where I think about design and marketing kind of blending into a world where how do we design moments that are going to inspire people to communicate outside of the game? And some of that, again, comes with like, define your hooks up front. It doesn't mean you can just be like, oh, our hook is this, right? But like, work at it, stay focused on it. What are your USPs? We also talk a lot internally. We call them moments that matter. What are the moments that matter in your game that you have to nail? What are your differentiators? Like all that stuff. And I know I've rambled a little bit about this stuff already in our chat, but to me, it's about aligning in-game experience with out-of-game communication, whether that's something I can show to you in a screenshot, whether it's something I can show to you in a GIF, whether it's something that's going to inspire someone to post something on the internet or talk about. It's what is going to take your experience out of the game.
Yeah, and everybody listening, if there's one thing I can call out to right now from that really awesome description of everything, I would say it's really focus on those moments that matter. Because basically everything that you said, Neil, I think can really get distilled in just that phrase, from the whole UX aspect all the way to the marketing. What are you doing to focus on those moments that matter? And because those moments that matter are share worthy, and focusing on something that's going to be promoting something that's worthy of people sharing. That's really where it comes down to. So if I were to boil down everything that you just said right now, it would just be focusing on those moments that matter. Like I can't think of anything else that would matter in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, so many things do, but still, I think you said it so well there.
You're playing a critical role in my life, Andrew, that I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by people throughout my career that basically take my giant word rambles and edit me down to something much more pointed. It's actually a running joke among people I work with that many people have had to bear that burden over the years, so I appreciate it.
Well, but I mean, I think to be fair, I wouldn't necessarily call that a burden, because I mean, clearly you are just such a huge resource of valuable information that I'm so grateful that we're making the time, that you're making the time here for the show and everything to share this. But no, I'll say thank you. I appreciate it.
I love this stuff.
But yeah, man.
No, yeah.
So all right, there was so much we covered here today, and I mean, I feel like there's just so much more we can talk about too, of course, but. We're coming on time for today. So with that said, before we close, what are some tips based off of, or suggestions, based off of the discussion we had today?
Yeah, for sure. I got a few. It'll probably be hopefully kind of a summary, but a little bit more pointed. So my first thing is zoom out. Like we were talking about, zoom out. Pull yourself out of the weeds of making the thing or making the feature. Make that user journey to and through your game, right? To the game, through the game. Oh man, we think people are going to hit a shareable moment here. Map that whole thing out, vet it, validate it. Do you actually really buy that these things are going to happen? UX design and user research, your Steam page and that journey, even if, I mean, you don't need to use a research department. You can do all kinds of low and humble stuff like that. Getting outside eyes, even if it's friends, other developers, like obviously the more outside, the better. But if you have limited resources, like just someone outside of yourself, outside of your team, I can't overstate enough on the zoom out point. Like, be brutally honest with yourself. It's tough. Making games is hard. But I think one of the things is like that can be kind of a nail in the coffin is like, don't assume that your game is worth making or playing, because it may not be. All ideas are great and exciting. I've had started lots of ideas, games, game projects, all kinds of things. And, that brutal honesty comes in handy, as tough as it is, about, is it time to move on, or do we really need to shift this to be more viable? And outside eyes helps you do that, and putting yourself in your user's shoes of like, sometimes it feels goofy, but I tell people like, literally just stop and be like, okay, I'm a person randomly browsing Steam. I click this, like walk through that user journey and do a little bit of role play. You'd be surprised at how powerful that is to be able to put yourself outside of, your own shoes. Next one I would say is probably do your research. Do market research, even if you don't know how, right? Some humble, maybe not totally accurate, not the best way is better than none at all, right? You have to have, you can't just make the thing. I'm sure loads of people would tell me I'm wrong, but have hypotheses, right? None of us have a crystal ball, but have hypotheses about where your players are going to come from and why, right? And then that goes with number one, help validate that. Do you really believe your players are going to come from these games and, give you a slice of their pie? I would, in general, try not to compete in red oceans, look for blue or purple oceans. Again, I'm not a market research expert, so feel free to ignore that. But red oceans are tough if you don't have a ton of money.
Yeah, in quick context, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term red ocean or purple or blue, basically it means blue ocean is clear and hasn't been ravaged by competition or other sharks and things like that. That's simply what the analogy, and that's also a book called Blue Ocean Strategy for anyone who's looking to take that approach even more directly. Great book. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Neil. Just want to make sure people understood what blue ocean, red ocean, and all that jazz is.
Yeah, no worries. And blue oceans can be tough, right? If you're talking about pure innovation. That's why I said
yes.
Purple. I don't even know if purple ocean's a thing, but it makes sense. It makes sense to me, so I used it, right? That's to me, that's where there's still space, right? But maybe it's not, you're not making the most insanely innovative, because, being crazily innovative and inventing a genre is also tough, right? So it's, finding the middle ground. Don't make a shooter to compete with Call of Duty. The third one is kind of, to me, like, is near and dear to my heart. Don't make a slide deck. Don't try to make a slide deck. If you're, and don't get me wrong, loads of great games. Pretty much every game has been made from a slide deck, but we're just big believers that codifying and prioritizing your experiences into a bit more of a blueprint of a vision can definitely be more effective. The kind of, I had this realization just the other day, I think actually after our conversation, Andrew, is, I think a lot about vision decks and things like that. And I'm like, they're so great at getting people excited, but they're just so vague and fuzzy. And then when you try to make them, it really tends to be hard for teams. There's that intellectual ether, and, it's it's all implicit, right? So there's a lot of risk there. And I realized that all vision decks start as pitch decks. And that's why they're kind of a super exciting markety phrase. It's this successful thing plus this successful thing, and we're all going to be rich. And they start as pitch decks, then you get the money, or you get the buy-in, and then boom, you got to start making the thing. So they usually end there. And so you just get a lot of power when you start to prioritize that vision. You can start to map that against comps. You can kind of do breakdowns of their experiences and priorities. You can, like you said, turn it into player segments. It's all about tools. Game dev's hard. And so one of our kind of quests is to make it easier, right? And make it, a little bit more confident with the tools we give. And then the last thing I will say is ignore all advice. And what I mean by that is filter everything. And I talk to people about this all the time. I don't mean ignore all advice, but what I mean is, that's hyperbolic for fun. Filter everything through your own compass. And if there's some, advice that someone's given you, like, and it really doesn't resonate with you, chuck it out the window. You and I have talked about this, Andrew. There's no answers in game dev. It's not black and white. Right. It's really valuable to listen to other people, take in their perspective and their experience. But like ultimately, it's your game, your goals, your company, your journey. You and your team or whoever that is. Like you're the one that's to live with the consequences. Like there's loads of great games out there that have been made breaking or just outright ignoring the rules or rules that I've said or whoever. So just take everything with a grain of salt.
Okay, so the reason why I laugh at that last one is because I'll have to ask you right here, and while we're recording, did you listen to the last podcast that I produced?
I didn't.
Okay, because the whole topic is about how to properly receive and share information with proper context, and it basically you distilled me in that episode. That's like 50 minutes of me ranting rambling on, right? But you distilled me in just that number 4 tip. Like that episode, you distilled it to 5 bullet points there. So, man, we're so much on the same wavelength. It's I don't know what to make of it. But at any rate, still good points, especially that last one, like you said, because, what it really comes down to, like you said, through your own compass. And all the other ones are great. Like, you can't emphasize those points enough. No point in reiterating. But of course, folks, that if you want to go back, obviously there's got to be a rewind button on your thing. There's a lot of great nuggets of information here, and this content too is gonna be on the show notes for those amazing tips. But anyways, we got to get going. But before we do, Neil, please let us know how can we get in touch with you? How can people reach out to find out more, or let's say they need help with their UX design and stuff? Where do they go to find you or to do those things? How can they connect?
Yeah, uxisfine.com is our website. Check out a bit there as a contact form, or you can hit us at contact@uxisfine.com. You can hit me directly, Neil, Neil @uxisfine. Same with Jason, same with Dave. We're not that hard to get a hold of. You can check us out on LinkedIn, ping us there. So yeah, we're pretty easy to reach out to, pretty easy to find. So just look for the big giant flaming logo.
No, literally their logo consists of flames with the words UX is fine in it. So, which is hilarious.
Everyone looks at it. It's like it's been the best business card for us ever, because obviously it's based on the "This is fine" dog meme. But everyone looks at it and they're like, yeah.
That's right.
They're like,
that's okay.
They're like, yeah, that's our game, or that's game dev. That's my life. Like every game dev ever just looks at it and just laughs. And then there's like a little tear inside their eye, I think, because they're like, yeah, we've all been there. So yeah, it was a stroke of genius that Dave had one day, I think, at an airport, and he sketched this on his iPad Pro and first go. It's never changed. And people get a good chuckle out of it.
Sweet, interesting fact. I did, because I did not know that until this moment. So, anyways, Neil, thank you so much. I mean, really can't thank you enough to everything that you shared with us today. It's been honestly a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been super great, Andrew. Genuinely love the chat. Super energizing for me, and always fun to nerd out. So I appreciate being here.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action.